Thank you, Dalia, for the introduction. So today I'm going to talk about temporalities of openness, time effect in Sudanese open spaces, and specifically I'll be talking about. This is part of an ongoing research on Sudanese open spaces and how the time affects them. So starting with the temporalities, we all know that temporalities exist since the creation of time. So, but the relationship between the modernity and temporalities is that when the modernity came, or when the modernity period came, it came to more like regulating these temporalities. Before the modernity, it was just spontaneous and irregular changes that affects the spaces, the places, and the architecture. So we want to focus here on open spaces rather than the architecture itself, recognizing that the open spaces are a main component of the urban fabric of the space. So the open spaces regulate time by patterns, space, and synchronization of practices being held in these spaces. While simultaneously, the time reshapes these spaces through memories that will be rooted in the minds of people, of communities that live in these areas, that use these spaces. And it also reshapes them by evolving orientation and repetition of these practices and activities. Okay, so changes of open spaces in Sudan over time. We'll just go quickly on this, just to know the context of the open spaces generally. So in the pre-colonialism and early Islamic era, the spaces were more like organic shapes. They were just the left out space that appears or created when the people finished their building their dwellings or services. So the left out space was creating or shaping the open spaces. These open spaces were used for different activities, just created by the practices of everyday life of the community. Then in the colonialism, more organized. As we see here, the plan of Khartoum was segmented and regulated as plots, planned as plots and plots for buildings and for open areas, and with specific uses. These uses were more like for ceremonies or political uses. Then in the 21st century, it was more like a combination between the policies of design and planning and the usage of everyday life of the inhabitants. So this was merged together to make the spaces or the open spaces that we see in the 21st century. Then the informal settlements were emerged. The immigration from the rural areas to the cities. So informal settlements integrated in between those planned spaces, and the open spaces were occupied by either dwellings or services or just informal functions that were needed when the number of inhabitants increased and the dwellers increased, and they were in informal housing. So then Sudan has been going through a lot of socio-political shifts. These activities and this era has been affecting the ways, making them as fields of for protests or for other activities that were linked with a specific political event. So these are also, I mean, like changing the usage of the space and changing their value accordingly. So as we're talking about the events passing through Sudan, Sudan has been through a lot of events that were affecting the open spaces specifically, whether by preventing people from being in these open spaces, or from the normal activities that has been always been there, or changing these activities, or even just go from the space and restrict the movement in the area. And on top of these events is the ongoing war now in Sudan. Okay, so let's move forward. How time reshapes the open spaces. The time reshapes the reshaping the open spaces through the memories. As an example, the Maidans that has witnessed political expressions. These expressions have made a memory inside the Sudanese people, inside their minds, that this space is linked with this. So the space is not like ever before. Also, it reshapes the open spaces through the orientation of functions and the repetition of practices, as I said before. So starting from the the smallest open space in Sudan, in Sudanese communities, the Hosh. The Hosh is the very basic and smallest open space that is involved in the house, in the Sudanese house space. And its value is, I think its value is very big to every Sudanese individual that lived in Sudan. That value became out of the events that happened in that house. So people of Sudan use this space as more than even the spaces, the indoor spaces. As we know, the climate of Sudan is pretty harsh. So from the dawn, from the the sunset until the morning, people of Sudan stay at the Hosh normally. But then throughout over time, the Hosh space was shrinked to a smaller space, and in some houses it's not even there because of the changing in the the way of building in especially in the towns. So to other kind of buildings, like the apartments that and going vertically instead of horizontally. Also, the shape of it was basically not a particular shape. It was an organic shape back then, and then it was more like a sorry, it was more like a rectangular shape. Okay, so moving forward, the Maidan is the space that is included in the neighborhood, in every neighborhood or every cluster in a neighborhood. It was first planned as a recreational space, mostly for football, as the football is the most sport in the Sudanese communities. Then the practices was made there was not only the first usage that they were designed for. So other uses were being held in that space, such as Eid prayers, ceremonies, and also the tea ladies sometimes be there. And in some cases, they were left vacant. And this is the worst case. They were left vacant, so they were collecting the rainwater and garbages. Okay, so let's move forward. The IDP camps. Okay, and this is the core of my presentation today. So the IDP camps are, as we all know, are temporary facilities or temporary structures that respond to a specific need or an emergency, and they're mostly being held in vacant spaces or some place that is not in use for the current time. So let's talk about Abu Shok. I chose Abu Shok for this study because it's the biggest camp in Darfur and hosts the largest amount of people. So the land of Abu Shok IDP camp before 2004. It is located in the northwestern edge of Al Fashir in western Sudan. So it was vacant, dry, and undeveloped land, planned as an open land marginal to the city of Al Fashir. The usage of it was seasonally for grazing and farming, and in most times it was just vacant and no one is doing any activity in it. Then in 2004, the vacant area was designed in formal grid model of plots structured in tents functioning as shelters for the internally displaced persons after the violence started in Western Sudan. While parts of the land it's the spaces in between those planned tents. So as I said before, it was planned to be temporary, not a permanent organization or planning, but to respond to this specific emergency. So over time, these tents were replaced by mud brick houses as a result of the continuity of what was first called emergency. The IDP camp turned into a place that not only contains shelters, but also their services, markets, and social spaces appeared in the vacant area between the plots. So it turned from the temporary. So I was saying that gradually the Abu Shok camp was integrated in the Al Fashir urban fabric, and the dwellings were more permanent. The interaction between the camp and the city was increased uh, over time, and the economy, the social bonds, and uh, other activities in between those the IDP and the town. In the late 2025, the RSF attacked the refugee camp multiple times, resulting in massive fire and hundreds of murders. While some could flee to the surrounding areas, the space witnessed different events throughout the years. Those events structured the way people will then perceive it. Murders, siege, starvation, and running for life. All these events was rooted in the minds of these people who were there, who were actually saw that space as a sanctuary for them, and a place where they can start over their lives. And then again, it was they saw. So the land of the Abu Shok IDP camp was once vacant, and then turned into a temporary refuge, and then into a neighborhood uh, within the urban fabric of Al Fashir. And then again, it turned into a land without people, but carrying a lot of memories, loss, and fear. Thank you. That was all I have today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for the chance to present my work and at this year's conversation on the theme of time. Thank you for the amazing organization. Thank you for all the participants and their valuable work and enriching presentations. So in today's presentation, I will begin by exploring the concept of transhumance, then delve into the temporal frameworks that underpin transhumance practices, and finally, I will turn to the architectural dimensions, highlighting how the Acham, which is the tent in Amazigh, and the Tadert, the house, each embody distinct temporal logics and how these forms reflect the broader rhythm of the transhuman life. And by the end of the presentation, I hope to illustrate the connectedness, let's say, of time, space, and architecture in transhuman cultures, and show how these insights can inform broader discussions on the nature of time in our modern world. So as this quote illustrates, time is inscribed everywhere. And it's has been showed in the different presentations of the participants. And I will try to illustrate it through the transhumance culture. So first of all, let's try to explain what is transhumance. So transhumance is a mode of inhabiting territory based on regular seasonal movement between different ecological zones. These movements usually happen between lowlands during winter and highlands during summer. So it follows stable routes, known locations, and cycles that are repeated year after year. So dwelling in this context does not mean living permanently in one place, but it means inhabiting several places over time, each one activated at a specific moment within a larger cycle. But before analyzing how time is materialized through space and practices, I think it's important to clarify the temporal frameworks of this architecture. So for this, I use the seasonal cycle of the eight margad as a situated example of a broader temporal logic shared by many transhumant and nomadic and semi-nomadic communities. So in this system, time is organized around ecology, mobility, and social regulation. So as the figures show, the annual cycle is structured by two key movements, the ascent to the pastures of the Adrar and the descent. So these are not just spatial shifts, they regulate labor, habitation, social life, and and resource management, exactly. So time is experienced less through numerical units as for the modernistic time and more through sequences of movements and return. So this system also relies on other calendars, lunar for religious life, solar for transhumance and pastoral work, and more recently the Gregorian calendar, mainly used for administration, schooling, and state institutions. So within this temporal regime, transhumance habitation gives rise to a dual architectural system composed of two forms. We have the akham, which is the tent, and the tadat, which is the house. So these two forms correspond to two different temporal modalities of dwelling within the same cycle. Each one is activated at a different moment for a different duration and under different conditions. Neither is conceived for a year-round occupation. So we will start with the akham, which is the tent, and try to understand the temporal inscription of this architecture that is activated during phases of mobility and seasonal stay. It responds to short-term occupation and rapid ecological adaptation. So the occupation of the tent follows a clear sequence. It is assembled, inhabited, folded, transported, and reassembled as else script not only through repeated patterns of presence and absence, but also through fabrication, maintenance, and repair. The material life of the tent follows a seasonal rhythm. Its woven elements age, are repaired, and gradually replaced. So maintenance is let's say, is continuous and not exceptional. And the tent is therefore never finished. As mentioned by Muhammad Mehdi, the life of the tent unfolds as an open-end spiral, and it is only interrupted when we abandon this mode of habitation. But also the fabrication of the tent or of the akham unfolds through multiple stages and constitutes a technical and social process. It is a moment of female knowledge transmission, and collective labor. So the akham is inseparable from a social temporality that is actively produced through collective practice. Inside the tent, space is organized less by fixed partitions, obviously, but by temporal patterns of use. In the same area, for example, in two or six or in one, we can have different functions at different times of the day or seasons. So activities in the tent overlap rather than being strictly separated. And sound also plays an important role in regulating cohabitation because because of the absence of solid partitions, voices are modulated, becomes attentive, and the rhythm is a structural social, let's say, interaction. And in the pictures, the tense also blurs we can see that the tense also blurs the distinction between the inside and the outside. So human, animal, and environmental rhythms all intersect in one place. And even after departure, the tent leaves traces in the landscape that become part of new ecological cycles. Following departure, manure accumulated during occupation becomes a resource for other species, extending the tent's presence beyond human habitation. Now we move to the tethered, which is the second part, or which is the second form of the cyclical habitation of the transhumant. The tethered presents relationship to time, because when we take it in isolation, it does not appear formally distinct from other rural houses. So its specificity emerges only when it is read within the transhumance temporal system. As Emile Laoust notes in his study of transhumant habitation in central Morocco, he says the form of the house alone allows it to be immediately identified as not a transhumance. It's the temporal system that governs its use. So the tethered is activated during phases of return, storage, and temporary anchoring. It is not designed for continuous occupation. And as we can see in the plans, is the storage. These spaces are dimensioned not only for daily use, but for seasonal or multi-month durations. So through storage, we can say that the time or the house accumulates time. Another aspect is the presence of, for example, in here, the presence of spaces dedicated to storing dismantled tent elements. And another important aspect to mention is the fact that furniture and domestic equipment circulates between the house and the tent. So the circulation prevents the stabilization of a permanent domestic arrangement. So the use of heavy materials give the house material endurance, and the permanence here does not mean constant use, but the capacity to spend. And in contemporary context, the standards increasingly incorporates modern construction materials such as the concrete blocks, and shows this evolution during time. And finally, I think it's very important to talk about the different problems that this population is facing, because they face a combination of long-term ecological, political, social pressures that make mobile pastoralism increasingly difficult. So for the political aspect of it, land privatization and state control of collective land restricts access to traditional grazing routes. Ecologically, we can talk the reduced pasture availability, the scarcity of water, and socially, we can talk about the schooling, the healthcare, and the job markets that are all organized around sedentary life, standard and linear time, pushing younger generations to a different mode of life and a way of life. So as a result, we can say that sedentarization is not really a choice, but it's a forced adaptation over time. Yet despite this structural transformation in Morocco, as my knowledge, no comprehensive state programs have been developed to accompany or support this transition in a sustainable and culturally appropriate manner for this population. That's all for me. Thank you. I hope you did get to learn something new.
Yeah, so today I'm gonna turn on the other side of the world and hope that this conversation and precedent study would be resonating and inspiring to have dialogues between different cultures across different nations. So my topic is about the timelessness of informal adaptation and how interpreting timelessness not in monumental time but in lived time, and mainly focusing on the social housing and Chinese commune mansions in their afterlives. So modern architecture has long equated timelessness with permanence, with the purity of form, material endurance, and resistance to change. Yet another form of endurance lies in the immutable, but in the adaptable. Architecture that allows for continual reinterpretation and reinvention achieves timelessness grounded in lived time rather than this monumental time. So here you can see three examples. The first one in Cuba, Havana, how large colonial houses were adapted to become these divided by several houses and become subdivided into different scales and reused. And this one in the middle is a former church being adapted informally by the neighborhood. And in the right is a Beijing traditional housings also being informally adapted. So these presentations examine how timelessness is achieved not by freezing time, but preserving a building as a monolithic, unchanged entity, but actually through endless micro scale redesigns. So I will focus on the example of what was imagined to originally be the ultimate monumental timeless building and how it collapsed and eventually became timeless in another unexpected way. So this is a commune mansion in Beijing, China, which was built in the 1950s, so more than 70 years ago. And back then, as a newly established communist nation, China sought to enforce its ideology of communal living and working to every scale of its nation and of life. So a prototype was needed. And that's how those three famous commune mansions in Beijing were built. This is one of them. You can see how it really was built as this monument of rising against all these traditional courtyard housing, low rise in the middle, and only the pagoda is slightly taller than it. So these three famous commune mansions in Beijing were built as exemplary cases to showcase what ideal collective life should be like. In other words, these buildings were conceived as monuments, timeless. So this occurred during the Great Leap Forward period, a period when collective living was enforced by the government in both urban and rural China. These ideological ambitions were deeply embedded in these commune mansion architecture designs. So the three exemplary commune mansions were designed with these modular living units adapted to different urban contexts. You can see these were the three buildings that eventually got built. And they were mainly built of these modular living parts. And these large ones were like all the shared programs. So only the living were happening in these modular pods, and everything else would outsource into other parts collectively in the building. So they were built with public canteens, shared water rooms, nurseries, communal activity rooms, even barber shops. So design clearly prescribed and determined like what would happen where. So it was a very top-down collectivist experiment, very rigid in structure, ideologically charged, and intended to regulate every. So this building type was actually intended to be duplicated and spread across the entire city or even across the country. You can see on the left, all those one of those commune mansions originally were trying to occupy the whole block and eventually to the city, duplicated, but eventually only three were built. But a more simplified social housing form was built and brought across the country and accommodating much of China's urban population between the 1950s and 1990s. But as you guys probably know, as China shifted towards privatization in 1990s, it opened up its markets. All the social housing gradually collapsed, and these housing types were soon seen as outdated and faced large-scale demolition. So of the three famous common mansions I just was talking about, they were once viewed as timeless monuments. Now one was demolished, one was evacuated due to fire hazards, and left uninhabited until today. So only one remains still in use to this day. And these timeless monuments seems to have collapsed. But over time, that like one building that still stands, the residents informally started reinterpreting the building's framework after it become not public but privatized. So now all the huge corridors, all the huge activity rooms are now not publicly owned but privately owned. And it determined on the residents who lived in there, like on how this was privately used, either like separated and divided between like inhabitants and one person owns a little part, or if it's still a public space. So they started to reinterpret this building's framework, forging this bottom-up form of commoning through unauthorized adaptations. So these created subversive communal spaces that challenged the original intentions of control. And now, 70 years later, the building achieved a very different kind of timelessness, not as a frozen monument, but more as a living organism. So the once oversized public spaces are now largely informally adapted. Through these scans and photographs and sketches, I'll try and document these different scales of redesign and reuse of that one commune mansion that is still existing. So first of all, what was impacting the most to the collapse of this system was the public canteen. Now it didn't have funding to be brought out. So the public canteen was divided into more units and retails, and you could see these new storefronts were added directly in front of the building and shares as corridors that led in. And because the public canteen now was torn down, people needed to find ways to cook. And inside their units, there weren't stoves or ventilation or spaces to cook. So these corridors become placed with these self-built stoves for cooking. And you could see this depicted or old TV shows, how this white corridor is placed with stoves and actually becomes more of a living room. But later on, most of this condition was shut down because it was a fire hazard. So the residents seek to find different rooms, those activity rooms, and try to make them those shared kitchens where everyone would collectively go in there and set up stoves and share the space as this shared kitchen. And this could be units, this could be activity rooms, like all different shapes and spaces. And the public corridors were acting more like storage spaces, drawing rooms, or living rooms, hanging clothes, and etc. And so originally, these activity rooms I was saying become either units, offices, or even shared kitchens and storage spaces. And new common spaces were formed in these like oversized corridors or oversized stair landings. As you can see, it's almost as if you're like walking into someone's living room. And these large activity rooms or ballrooms are transformed into like offices and even headquarters, as you can see here. So walking through these scans in these building corridors is like an endless panorama of living rooms, drawing rooms, and someone's kitchen. It's a gray zone of public and what is private and what is shared and what is not shared. But throughout, it's all informally adapted and tailored to what its residents need and what they find should be placed in that space. So looking at these corridor sections, these scans, the building reads more like an organism. So some parts are 70 years old and others may have been reconfigured last week. New demising walls are being put up. And this reveals an alternative notion of timelessness, not permanence through fixed form, but endurance through continual transformation. These communal mansions become a temple architecture, a container for change, where micro-scale everyday modifications accumulate. And similar strategies of evolution can be observed in those traditional courtyards buildings surrounding these communal mansions. Additions and transformations are continuously introduced by their users, often on a daily basis. So you can see, so red is what I'm trying to trace as these newly added, and it could be even clear in this bird view. So looking at this planned accumulation, this diagram on the right, it can be seen that these buildings were originally designed as very symmetrical, hierarchically driven, hierarchically ordered courtyard complexes. And their present condition is far from what their designers envisioned. Yet today they are still adapting to the needs of their inhabitants. And by revisiting these forms of informal adaptation, does not seek to romanticize these controversial spaces, as these living environments are deeply flawed, as you guys could see, often overcrowded, unsafe, and precarious. But within their decay exists acts of care, adaptability, and quiet resistance, and what the residents feel as they need, and how they gain agency onto this system that was originally very a top-down system that the government decided how you would live your life or how activities would happen in this building. And now they gain more agency of how they determine how these spaces would be used by themselves. And so these spaces raise a question for architects and designers today, like how we design buildings that are not finished as the moment of completion, and how we allow spaces to remain undefined, open to reinterpretation, or responsive to lives that will inevitably change. So in a contemporary context, increasingly governed by regulation, standardization, and risk management, projects, what does it mean to design breathe, age, and be reshaped by its inhabitants? I think the communal mansion suggests that what endures most is not the fixed form, but the framework that allows collective life to continuously negotiate its own space over time and adapt. And that's how it becomes timeless in a live time and actually adapts and not as a frozen monument. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. I will be speaking about materials and time. We are a practice based in Mexico, and I'm going to be speaking more about my experience than as a theorist. For me, the negotiation materials don't simply age; they don't negotiate. They negotiate with heat and humidity, with dust and salt, with maintenance and neglect, with the economy of repair and with the culture of surrounds them. Some materials grow more beautiful with time, and others decay, others fail suddenly. And this difference is rarely aesthetic. It's ecological, climatic, and deeply human. I'm not here as a theorist. I'm here as an architect who has learned, sometimes the hard way, that every project is ultimately a conversation with time. Domus in 2025 framed that here is a material odyssey, a reminder that architecture is not only an image, but a physical pact with matter. They even suggested that materiality is a message, and I would add one more thing from practice. Materiality is a message, but time is the editor. Because time rewrites our intentions, it exposes weak details. It requires repairable systems, and it turns the building into a living archive of decisions. When I started thinking about Sudan, I immediately felt some strange familiarities with Mexico. Of course, the contexts are different, but there are some deep resonance between both. As Mara just mentioned, some informal settlement, colonization, things that we also have in Mexico. In both territories, architecture is never abstract. It's shaped by climate, scarcity, and social complexity. The environment is not neutral. Heat, sun, seasonal rains, dust, and infrastructure constraints force architecture to become resilient. Both places also share something crucial, the intelligence of adaptation. Informal systems, whether commerce, mobility, or housing, are not simply problems. They are also survival strategies. And architecture it wants to be real, must learn to work with that reality. And finally, both countries carry a layered relationship with modernity. Modernity as a promise, modernity as a rupture, and modernity as something that must be translated in local material cultures. If we look at material traditions, the first obvious connection is earth. In both Sudan and Mexico, earth, adobe, mud, brick, rammed earth plaster has become a foundation material. Not because it was fashionable, but because it was available, workable, and thermally intelligent. Thick walls keeps coolness. They soften the extremes of day and night, the architecture that understands climate. But materials are not only climate, they are also progress. Materials differently than an airport, differently than a market. Program shapes durability, expectations, maintenance, and symbolism. For example, Joaquin Island, I hope I say that correctly. Joaquin was built with coral stone from the Red Sea. Architecture literally carved from the sea. Coral is a material of place, but also a material of status and power. It signals trade, access, and urban ambition, and it carries a fragile relationship with time, vulnerable to salt, erosion, and abandonment. So we'll look at this with two different logics. Earth as a logic of availability and thermal survival, coral as a logic of symbolic ambition and coastal power. We have our own versions in Mexico. Earth and stone as everyday materials, industrial skins as imported systems as declaration of progress. And this is where my practice enters. This is a house we built in a place near Mexico City. It's a house designed to be as a net zero system. It started it was not originally thought as a net zero system, but it evolved to that way because the conditions start pushing out in that direction. It harvests its own water, it treats its own wastewater, it heats water through solar systems, it generates electricity with photovoltaic panels, and it stays connected to satellite internet. And in this house, material aging is not cosmetic, it's operational. When you are disconnected from the grid, durability becomes a form of freedom. In the beginning, we wanted to do it with rammed earth. It's not common in this area of Mexico, and we make different tests. And I think that's something very important when you're practicing on doing architecture. Do tests. We explore it seriously because the site conditions show us that this was not the ideal material for the specific environment and for the specific construction reality. And so when we make these tests, we're very concerned about erosion because it's a place where we have a lot of rain and a lot of humidity. And so we make an important decision. Sometimes the real act of respect is not to impose a romantic technique, but to choose what will age better, be maintained better, and last longer. This project also opened a future question for us. If we can do a house with more or less limited resources, disconnected from the grid, we can do communities also disconnected from the grid. No? So this puts us on a very interesting position for architecture in the future. Speaking about modernism changed architecture in many ways. It brought extraordinary technique possibilities, but it also accelerated time. It introduces a belief that what was new was always better, that speed was progress, that replacement was normal. And it often important ideas with fully translation them into climate, culture, and long-term maintenance reality. In many parts of the world, and certainly in Mexico, we adopt modern systems that look efficient in paper but age poorly, when exposed to heat, water, informal use, and limited maintenance budgets. Modernity didn't just change forms, it changed tempo of construction, occupation, and demolition. This is another project of our practice, and this is completely different because this is a contemporary museum. And it was shaped through parametric design. A building where the envelope is not just protection, but identity. In such a building, the facade is not decoration, it's the entire message. And because of that, durability becomes existential. If the skin fails, the building fails. What makes this project especially interesting is that the material choice was not purely aesthetic. It's shaped by industrial reality and client requirements. The client group has specific capacities. They have mines, manufacturing, equipment, process. So the facade options were studied between marble and aluminum. We choose aluminum, but we didn't choose it blindly. We made a lot of tests with National University in Mexico to see how this material would age and which would be the durability during time. So the Sumaya is not a metaphor. Time becomes a laboratory question. And the key point for the conference, material aging is not only about beauty, it's about performance, identity, and responsibility. So this brings me to the future. I'm not a romantic. I don't believe the future is only high tech. And I don't believe the future is only tradition. I think the future is synthesis. We need to understand how to manage traditional materials which carry deeply climatic intelligence, earth, stone, wood, shading, mass, repair, and technology also giving a very interesting new tools. We have simulations, coordinations, AI, energy harvesting, water systems, photovoltaic skins, a new way to test alternative quickly. But the real innovation is not the tool itself. The real innovation is understanding the life cycle of a building, how it will age, how it will be repaired, who will maintain it, what would happen when systems fail, how the building stays useful without becoming obsolete. Because we are very interested today in sustainability, but there's nothing less sustainability than something you have to demolish. No, you cannot build something and then 10 years later it's demolished because it aged poorly. So my proposal is very simple, and it comes with practice. Design materials as it times will argue back, because it will. I want to return where I began. Materials are not static. They age, adapt, or fail in dialogue with ecological time, climate time, and social time. And that is why I'm grateful to be here, because the work you are doing in Modern Sudan Collective is not only about modernity. It's about memory, continuity, and the trace of times embedded in building environment. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for creating a space where architecture can be discussed, not only as a form, but as a time made visible through matter. Thank you very much.